Hey everyone. So I got asked to decorate a wall at a real estate agency, and I thought, why not make a 3D map of their area? Sounded fun, so I went for it. After putting together a quick layout on my computer, I headed over to the hardware store and cut all the materials to the sizes I needed. Then came the tricky part, getting all the materials back to my workshop. I ended up strapping a big sheet of plywood to the roof of my car and just hoping for the best on the drive home. When I got back, my wife and I hauled everything into the workshop together. Teamwork. Then I started cutting out all the map pieces. These are the parts that make up the middle layer of the map. The laser cutter took a while, but honestly, I can't imagine doing this by hand. That would have taken weeks. I also labeled every piece so I wouldn't get lost later. In total, I ended up with 13 pieces. After that, we laid the base plywood on the table, and I started placing all the map pieces where they needed to go. Next, I taped all the map pieces together with masking tape so they'd stay in place. Now it was basically one big, flexible piece that I could move around however I needed. I stepped back, took a good look at the shape, and started sketching a cutting line for the jigsaw. I didn't want the map to end up looking like just another rectangular wall decoration. I wanted it to feel like a mix between artwork and something genuinely useful for their business. Something that grabs attention the moment you walk into the office. So I tried to give it a more natural, organic outline that would make it stand out on the wall. Then I started cutting along the line I'd marked with the jigsaw. It was actually pretty satisfying, just slowly following the curve and watching the final shape of the map come to life. I took my time so the edges would come out clean, since this outline is a big part of the final look. By the end, I could finally see the unique silhouette I'd been imagining. And now I hit the most boring part. Sanding. First, I used an abrasive wheel to chamfer all the edges, and then I went over everything by hand to smooth out the sides of the future map. It's not glamorous, but it has to be done if I want clean, professional-looking edges. I couldn't even use my orbital sander this time because the shape was too awkward, and I didn't have enough room to maneuver it. So it turned into one of those long, slow, zen-like sanding sessions where you just zone out and keep going until it finally feels right. Then I marked the edges of the middle layer with a pen so that when I started gluing everything together, I'd stay perfectly within those lines. It's a small step, but it saves a lot of stress later on, especially with a shape this irregular. Now for the gluing itself. I used PVA wood glue, which works great for this kind of project. After spreading it evenly, I pressed the layer into place, and just to be extra safe, and to keep everything level while it dried, I secured it with staples. It's a bit of a belt and suspenders approach, but I'd rather do it right the first time than fix problems later. I ended up using an entire pack of staples. Honestly, it must have been hundreds. And once everything dried, I got to enjoy the equally thrilling job of pulling every single one of them back out. But I figured out a little system to make it less painful. First, I loosen each staple with pliers, then pull it out, and repeat, and repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, and eventually, the piece was finally free of all those staples. After that, I had to deal with all the joints between the pieces and the little craters left behind by the staples. So I mixed up some two-component automotive filler, the stuff that sets fast and sands nicely, and started working it into every gap, crack, and hole I could find. It's one of those slow, careful steps where you're basically sculpting the surface back to perfection. I went over the whole map section by section, making sure everything was smooth and solid, so the final piece would look clean and seamless once painted. And of course, where would we be without sanding? I also needed to sand the sides. Now I'm moving on to the spray painting stage. The lower part of the map is getting a blue coat since that area is the sea, and the upper part will be painted pink because it represents a salt lake, and those lakes actually look pink in real life thanks to the plankton that lives in them. I did a few light passes with the spray cans to keep the colors even and avoid drips. It's always the most satisfying part, watching the whole piece suddenly come to life with color. Now I'm painting the middle section orange, since that's the real estate agency's main corporate color. At first, I tried using regular paint with a roller, but the coverage was awful, super streaky and just not hiding anything. So then I switched to spray paint, thinking it would fix the problem. But nope, it was just as bad. In the end, I had to spray the paint on, and then roll it out to even the surface, basically mixing both methods just to make it look halfway decent. Definitely not ideal. Next time, I'm going straight for higher quality paint, so I don't have to wrestle with it like this again. Next, I paint the sides black. The most interesting part for me was creating the actual pattern of the city and all the surrounding neighborhoods. I started by loading the black painted panels into the laser cutter, and it went to work cutting out every tiny detail: streets, houses, parks, everything. It took a while, but the precision you get from a laser cutter is totally worth it. After that, I carefully separated the thin cutout pattern from its base and started gluing it onto the orange layer. This part needs absolute precision. If the first piece is even slightly off, every piece after that gets misaligned, and the whole map ends up looking crooked. So it turned into a slow, measure 3 times, glue once kind of process. Next, I moved on to coating the water area with UV epoxy resin. This step was a bit of a battle. I got a few weird artifacts and bumps in some spots, so I had to sand everything smooth and pour a second layer to get that clean, glossy finish I wanted. I also wanted to add some small labels and text to the map to make it easier to navigate. I printed them on photo paper and sealed them with a top coat of UV resin so they wouldn't fade or peel over time. And here's a fun little trick I used. I mixed a tiny bit of resin, sprinkled in some crushed sand, and applied it to the edges to create realistic-looking beaches. It's a small detail, but it adds a lot to the final look. And finally, I had to make the wall mounts for the back so the whole thing could hang safely once it's installed. And so, after about 2 weeks of work, the big day finally arrived. I started by drilling the holes in the wall to hang the map, double-checking the measurements so everything would sit perfectly level. These are the hooks I ended up using, simple, sturdy, and strong enough to hold the whole piece without any wobble. Then, with the help of my friends, we lifted the map into place. It was definitely a team effort. This thing isn't light. Once it was up, all that was left was to peel off the protective packaging and finally see what the finished piece looked like on the wall. Honestly, that moment alone makes all the sanding and stapling worth it. Now, let's see the final result. But as we stepped back and looked at it, we all kind of had the same thought. Something's missing. The map looked great, but it needed a little extra touch to really bring it to life. That's when we decided it had to be LED lighting. So, a few days later, I came back with a fully prepared LED kit. And that's the finished 3D map. This project took a lot of time, a lot of sanding, and way too many staples, but seeing it up on the wall made it all worth it. Thanks for watching and hanging out with me through the whole process. If you enjoyed this build, feel free to subscribe. And I'm curious, what should I create next? Let me know your ideas in the comments.